Okay, folks, it's just a little after 2, and we're ready for our second presentation of the afternoon. As I mentioned before, this is a good historical history talk, and also you'll enjoy, as you see on the screen, a good analysis of the two collections. You also notice that Mr. Noel, Franklin Noel, has been in EAC 1009 and has been a member of our group for quite a number of years. Frank has been seriously collecting coins for over 40 years. He's been a member of EAC since 1980. He has published articles in the Numismatist, Pennywise, and the C4 newsletter. He speaks occasionally on a variety of numismatic topics. Groups he has addressed include the American Numismatic Association, Early American Coppers, the Newman Numismatic Portal Symposium, and the Northwest Coin Club. Frank is a retired U.S. magistrate judge. He's got 3 grandchildren under 4. It was my pleasure to introduce Franklin Noel.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you all for coming. As Lou described, this is a story of 2 coin collectors. The first is Louis Eliasberg, who is the only collector who's ever assembled a complete set of U.S. coins by date and mint mark. And the other is Charles M. Williams, who also assembled a world-class coin collection of U.S. coins in the first half of the 20th century. Until very recently, I had never heard of Charles Williams. I had been quite familiar with Louis Eliasberg. I was fascinated by the Charles Williams' story, and I thought others might find it interesting as well. So I put together a presentation that I called A Tale of Two Collectors, which I gave at the Newman Numismatic Portal Symposium in November. And since that time, how many people, and by the way, did anybody see that NNP thing? 2. Well, thank you, Leanna. Ms. Spurrier is responsible for running the entire symposium and does it with aplomb. And it was a fun experience. But I've totally revamped the presentation, and I call it A Tale of Two Collectors, Copper Edition. And again, I apologize to Charles Dickens. I won't use that. Okay, so both men benefited from what we today would call white privilege, but neither was what we would call a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. At a time when religion was more important to one's social status than it might be today, Eliasberg was Jewish and Williams was a Roman Catholic. In 1940, Jews represented less than 4% of the U.S. population and Roman Catholics about 16%. Eliasberg was largely a self-made man, whereas Williams was from an already successful family that owned a thriving insurance company. Eliasberg was a Southerner whose family moved about during his youth, while Williams was from the Midwest and whose family, by the time of his birth, was firmly rooted in Cincinnati, Ohio. So let's meet these 2 collectors. Louis Eliasberg was born in 1896 in the Deep South, Selma, Alabama. By the time he was 11, his family had moved first to Atlanta, Georgia, and then ultimately to the more northern but still segregated southern city of Baltimore, Maryland. He graduated from a Baltimore public high school incongruously called City College. There was a time when graduation from City College High School entitled a student to attend nearby Johns Hopkins University without having to take an entrance exam. This is a picture of City College, Baltimore at about the time that Elias Berg would have graduated. The school later moved to much more elaborate quarters located on a hilltop in Baltimore. Founded in 1839, it remains one of Baltimore's premier public high schools. So far as I've been able to determine, Elias Berg never actually graduated from an actual college. He did attend the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, but only for one semester. When he was 23 years old, he raised $35,000 from some investors and purchased a finance company which he renamed the Finance Company of America. In 1927, he married Hortense Kahn, and together they had two children, Louis Jr. and Richard. Over the years, Elias Berg expanded his business horizon and became involved in a variety of business activities, including being a founding investor and a director of the Baltimore National Bank. He also dabbled in Major League Baseball. In 1953, he and some others joined together to bring the St. Louis Browns to Baltimore and called them the Baltimore Orioles. Charles Williams was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1912. In 1934, he graduated from Georgetown University, and this is a photograph of Georgetown's iconic Healy Hall at about the time that Charles Williams attended. 6 years after graduating, he married Elizabeth Seyfried, and the couple had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. Immediately after college, he went to work as a salesman for the family's insurance business, and by 1951, he had risen to the position of president. He later became chairman of the board, a position he held until 1973. Even after leaving the post of chairman, he remained a director for the rest of his life. The Williams family also dabbled in Major League Baseball. Charles's brother William Williams owned at one time the Cincinnati Reds. It was during the nadir of the Great Depression that both men took up coin collecting in a serious way. In 1933, the U.S. unemployment rate reached nearly 25%, the highest unemployment rate in U.S. history. Most historians and economists agree that 1933 was the low point of the Great Depression. Throughout his life, Elias Berg prided himself on navigating his businesses through the Great Depression with minimal disruption. The Depression, and in particular the government's response to it, energized Elias Berg's interest in collecting coins. While he began collecting as early as 1925, he was quoted later in life saying that it really took off in 1933, when Congress and President Roosevelt outlawed the private ownership of gold. Both Roosevelt's executive order, seen here on the left, and the Gold Reserve Act, which outlawed the private ownership of gold, had exceptions for gold coins with numismatic value. As Elias Berg was a hard money man, he took refuge in the numismatic exception and started buying up gold coins. Indeed, it was his collection of U.S. gold coins that was completed first. Soon he expanded his numismatic horizon and set as his goal the acquisition of one specimen of every coin struck by the U.S. Mint by date and mint mark. Like Elias Berg, Charles Williams' father guided the family business through the Great Depression with minimal disruption. I don't know when Williams purchased his first coin, but I do know that by January 1933, you can see here is the numismatist from that month, and in that issue, Williams's name appears as a new member of the American Numismatic Association. Like his role in the family business, Charles Williams' involvement in coin collecting may have been a family affair. More in a moment. Eliasberg was 15 years older than Williams and likely started collecting before Williams did. But it was Williams' collection that was first recognized as being the most complete. In 1936, a then well-known coin collector, William Dunham, died. His collection was once described as, quote, the best known private numismatic collection formed in America, end quote. Dunham's collection included some of the rarest U.S. coins known, including the Dexter specimen of the 1804 silver dollar and the 1822 half eagle, of which only 3 exist. To interest Williams in acquiring some of the rarities in the Dunham collection, in 1940, Texas coin dealer B. Max Mell, who had purchased the collection, wrote a letter to Williams and to Williams' father, Charles F. Williams. In the letter, he wrote, quote, you now possess one of the finest and most complete collections of American coins in the world. But the addition of the rarities now offered you, especially the 1804 dollar and the half eagle of 1822, your doubts as to the final completion of your collection will now and forever be removed. The senior Mr. Williams, Charles F. Williams, was a well-known art collector. He started collecting local Ohio artists, but soon graduated to European old masters. When he purchased the 17th century Portrait of a Young Girl by Peter Paul Rubens, it was reported in the New York Times. That Mell addressed the letter to both Charles M. Williams and his father, Charles F. Williams, suggests to me that numismatics might have been a family affair, as it was for the Garretts, and as we'll see in a moment, the Clapps. Or perhaps Mell simply thought Williams would require financial assistance to acquire the coins that were now being offered. The catalog and prices realized for the Dunham auction show that the 1804 dollar and the Dunham 1822 half eagle sold in the auction for record sums. But David Bowers contends that both coins were sold privately to Williams before the Dunham auction ever occurred. In any event, we know from other sources that both of those coins entered the Williams collection. I don't have any evidence that the two men were actively competing with one another in their coin collecting. But with hindsight, it's clear that if Eliasberg wanted to fulfill his goal of collecting by date and mint mark every U.S. coin struck, he had some catching up to do. In 1942, opportunity knocked. 2 years earlier, another well-known coin collector, John H. Clapp, had died. Clapp, building upon a collection begun by his father in the 19th century, had amassed what coin dealers J.B. and Morton Stack described as, quote, one of the most important money accumulations ever assembled, end quote. I'm going to pause here for just a second to note that coin dealers, then as now, are sometimes prone to hyperbole. In any event, the Stack brothers brought the Clapp collection to the attention of Louis Eliasberg, who, on February 4th, 1942, wrote them a letter in which he offered to pay the unprecedented sum of $100,000 for the entire collection. Eliasberg offered Stax a $1,000 commission for alerting him to the opportunity. The purchase of the Clapp collection brought within reach Eliasberg's goal of acquiring one of every U.S. coin. 1950, mid-century mileposts. 1950 was a turning point in the collecting lives of both Charles Williams and Louis Eliasberg. Abe Kossoff, who was a coin dealer with whom both Williams and Eliasberg worked, published a regular price list / newsletter that he called the Numismatic Gallery Monthly. Both these mid-century mileposts were reported in Kossoff's monthly newsletter. On the left, we see an article about Williams, wherein Kossoff reports that he had purchased Williams's entire collection for $250,000 together with two other partners. He didn't report this until after he had sold almost all of the coins. So it's in the Williams collection was sold sometime before June of 1950, but he doesn't report it until January of 1951. The second milepost also occurred in 1950. Louis Eliasberg reached his goal of owning one of every coin struck by the U.S. Mint. On November 7, 1950, Eliasberg acquired the last coin he needed to complete his collection. Kossoff reported this in the April 1951 issue of his newsletter. From 1950 on, the numismatic lives of these two collectors diverged dramatically. Before we learn what direction each took, let's take a closer look at what was in these two collections. Let me start with one non-copper coin that was important to both collections. It is this 1873 CC No Arrows dime. The coin is unique. There is only one in existence. It is one of the great ironies of American numismatics that Williams' decision to liquidate his collection eventually enabled Eliasberg to complete his. You'll recall that Charles Williams sold his entire collection, which included this unique dime, to a partnership put together by Abe Kossoff. This 1873 Carson City No Arrows dime was the last coin Louis Eliasberg needed to complete his collection. Kossoff sold off the bulk of the Williams collection at an auction he held in Los Angeles in June of 1950. Although Eliasberg traveled to Los Angeles just to purchase this dime and one other coin, he failed to win the dime. Nearly 6 months later, on November 7, 1950, Eliasberg was finally able to acquire the dime from the coin dealer who had won it at the June auction, thereby completing his collection of every coin by date and mint mark struck by the U.S. Mint. Only because Williams had decided to liquidate his collection was Eliasberg able to eventually acquire this 1873 Carson City dime without arrows. Okay, now let's find some copper coins. Happily for today's numismatists, there are complete listings of all the copper coins owned by these two men in 1950. First, all of the cents and half cents that Kossoff and his partners acquired from Charles Williams were dispersed by the Numismatic Gallery via a mail bid auction with a closing date of November 14, 1950. And this is the auction catalog. And it's interesting when you look at it and listen to what we just heard from our last speaker. There are no photographs in this catalog, or if there are, there's very few. It's a listing of coins. But it's clear from this catalog, even though Williams's name is not mentioned anywhere in the catalog, that it is the Williams coins that are being described. Likewise, with respect to Louis Eliasberg, the Bowers and Marina Eliasberg auction catalog from May of 1996 includes all of the cents and half cents in the Eliasberg collection, even though the auction occurred over 20 years after his death and nearly 50 years after he completed the collection. Both men had a complete date set of U.S. cents and half cents. No surprise there. Eliasberg had been clear about his collecting goal. He wanted one each of every coin by date and mint mark ever issued by the U.S. Mint. I have not found any statement from Williams regarding his collecting goals, but we know from correspondence and statements from coin dealers that in terms of completeness his collection rivaled Eliasberg. This is borne out by a simple glance at the auction catalogs of their respective collections. Each had at least one specimen, often multiples, of each cent struck between 1793 and 1857, except for 1815, of course, the 1 year when no cents were struck. Likewise, each also had a complete set of all business strike half cents, as well as all the proof-only issues. Collecting half cents and cents by die variety in 1950 was certainly not what it has become today. In many ways, it was in its infancy. Again, this ties in precisely with our last speaker talking about what collecting was like for die varieties at the turn of in the mid-20th century. While Crosby, Hayes, Frizard, Gilbert, and others had done much pioneering die study work starting in the 19th century, William Sheldon's definitive early American cents had only been published the year before, 1949. It would be 22 years and 33 years, respectively, before Roger Cohen and Walter Breen published their own books, building on the work begun by Ebenezer Gilbert in 1916, describing die varieties of the U.S. half cent. While Eliasberg never set out to collect copper coins by die variety, in hindsight, as we pore over the catalog that includes his copper coins, we see that he in fact did acquire quite a few large cents and half cent die varieties. Likewise, when we look closely at the Numismatic Gallery auction catalog from November 1950, the evidence is quite informative. And we'll look at some of that in a moment. Collecting copper coins by die variety has come a long way since 1950. In his November 1950 mail bid sale of Williams copper coins, Kossoff expressly noted, quote, "The new work by Dr. William H. Sheldon, Early American Cents, has been in collectors' hands for some months, sufficient for proper evaluation and appreciation. To those not yet familiar with this book, the catalogers heartily recommend its acquisition." By the time Mark Borcourt and David Bowers cataloged the Louis Eliasberg collection nearly 50 years later in 1996, collecting copper by die variety was well established. The amount of detail in each catalog enabled the preparation of a spreadsheet listing all of the cents and half cents in both collections by die variety. And here is what I found. Eliasberg had 62 early sent die varieties by Sheldon variety number. Williams' collection had 217, including 2 non-collectibles, one of which was the unique 1793 NC2, the strawberry leaf variety. Middle dates show a similar ratio, 60 for Louis Eliasberg, 176 for Charles Williams. For the late dates, there was even more disparity. Louis Eliasberg only had 39 Newcomb varieties, whereas Williams had 198. Half cents, there was a little more parity. Of the 114 die varieties then known, according to Gilbert, Eliasberg had 84 and Williams had 102. So of the total copper die varieties known in 1950, 1,046, Eliasberg had 245 and Williams 693. So while Eliasberg never set out to collect copper coins by die variety, it appears that Charles Williams did. Charles Williams acquired nearly 700 copper die varieties, which represented nearly 2/3 of all the copper die varieties then known. Although neither man was close to completing a die variety set in any of these categories, the numbers suggest to me that Charles Williams, for a time at least, was collecting large cents and half cents by die variety. Eliasberg, not so much. So now, let's look at some of these remarkable copper coins. Let's start with this 1793 C3 half cent, once owned by Charles Williams. This was lot 669 in the 1950 Kossoff mail bid sale. More recently, it was lot 3017 in Heritage's Jim McGuigan sale last summer. According to McGuigan, it is the finest known specimen of this variety. I think if we just look at it, we know that must be true. Where the auction house assigns an EAC grade, I will use it. If not, I'll use the grade assigned by the third-party grading service. In the summer of 2022, this coin realized in excess of $1 million. And I'll pause here to note that I was disappointed to learn that Heritage is no longer going to be assigning EAC grades to the coins in their catalog. And this apparently is because, as Mark Burkhart told us yesterday, he's the only one who does that. And he is attempting to retire from, or at least cut back on the amount of time he devotes to his job. So we're going to be losing that piece of numismatic information in Heritage catalogs going forward. So let's move on to this 1793 chain cent, once owned by Louis Eliasberg. PCGS calls it an MS65. It was lot 487 in Bauer's 1996 auction of the Eliasberg collection, where it was graded MS64. So far as I can tell, this coin last sold in June of 2018 as lot 3776 in a Heritage Long Beach signature auction, where the consignor was described as, quote, an important New York collection. It there realized $900,000. 6 years earlier, In an American numismatic rarities auction, this same coin brought over $1.3 million. Not a bad return for a coin that Eliasberg paid $330 for in 1946. You'll recall that I mentioned that Charles Williams appeared to be collecting large cents by die variety. He owned nearly 2/3 of all the Sheldon and Newcomb numbers, including 2 that Sheldon called non-collectible. This coin is one of the NCs. It is a unique NC2 1793 strawberry leaf, wreath cent. Heritage assigned it an EAC grade of Fair 2. It appears Williams bought it either from or through James Kelly, the Cincinnati coin dealer who was a player in the drama surrounding Louis Eliasberg's purchase of that 1873 Carson City No Arrows dime that he needed to complete his collection. This coin was also once owned by Floyd Starr, Ted Nafsker, Jay Perino, Anthony Terranova, Dan Holmes, and Adam Mervis. I believe Mervis purchased this coin at the Goldberg auction of Dan Holmes's large cents. So far as I can tell, it last changed hands in January 2014 when Heritage sold the Adam Mervis collection. It sold for over $350,000, a pretty steep price for a coin that is not even good. This coin belongs to our convention education chair, Lou Alfonso. It's a 1794 S65 from the Eliasberg collection, though as I understand, Lou did not purchase it in 1996. It was lot number 498 in the Bowers 1996 auction of the Eliasberg collection. Lou purchased it later from a Goldberg sale in 2013. PCGS graded this coin AU55, though the Goldbergs called it an EAC EF40+. It is tied for the finest graded by PCGS for this variety. At one time, the late Walter Husak also owned this coin. Anything else you want to add about this coin, Lou?
No, I just think it's a beautiful color and one that I don't intend to sell.
It is an amazing coin. All of these coins that we're showing are what I would call eye candy. This is another Eliasberg coin. It was lot 407 in the 1996 Eliasberg sale. Most recently, it was lot 3978 in the Fun 2021 auction, where it was part of the Oliver Young consignment. Other owners have included James Ellsworth, John Work Garrett, William Cutler Atwater, and D. Brent Pogue. PCGS calls this coin MS67 Red Brown. It has consistently been described as the finest known specimen of the 1796 no-pole half cent. You can see there's no pole. In 1996, at the Eliasberg sale, it sold for over $500,000, and in 2021 it realized $780,000. One of the great things about collections like Eliasberg and Williams is that for each of the ultra rare coins like those we've been highlighting, there are a multitude of less spectacular coins that can still be had by collectors of more modest means. This 1805 humble half-cent illustrates the point. It is an 1805 half-cent graded VG10. It's a scarce variety, C2. When Ebenezer Gilbert wrote his book in 1916, he was aware of only 2 examples of this variety. Today, more are known, but Bill Eckberg still estimates there's only about 40 surviving specimens. In addition to Charles Williams, this coin's provenance includes well-known half-cent collectors Michael Spurlock and Robert Schoenwalter. Today, this coin resides in my collection. I purchased it from Chris McCauley in 2010 at the EAC Convention held that year in Annapolis, Maryland. Despite its modest grade, Walter Breen thought this was the 5th finest known for the die variety. At the time, it was owned by Robert Schoenwalter, who had purchased it from the Kossoff November 1950 mail bid auction. In awarding it a place in his 1983 condition census, Breen acknowledged that he had not seen the coin. Breen was also unaware that the Schoenwalter coin was the same as the Charles Williams coin, as he references the Williams coin and concludes that it may be one of the coins in the census or it may have long since disappeared. If Breen had seen the coin, I wonder how he would have evaluated these scratches that start right here, go all the way across Liberty's head, and break into 2 and end in the field behind her head. They clearly mar the look of the coin, but at the same time they serve to definitely identify this as the Charles Williams Schoenwalter Spurlock coin. Indeed, it was this coin that introduced me to Charles Williams. I had never heard of Charles Williams until 2020, when I showed this coin at the half-cent happening, which was held that year via Zoom. Bob Keebler saw the coin and recognized it from these 2 scratches. The next day, he alerted me to the Charles Williams provenance, which, in a roundabout way, has led to this presentation. One might say it was the best of coins, it was the worst of coins. Again, with apologies to Charles Dickens, it's time to move on. To quote Bill Eckberg, 1831 is a conundrum. Most, if not all, half-cent experts agree that no business strike half-cents dated 1831 exist today. Those half-cents that purport to be business strikes are in fact circulated proofs. In any event, we don't need to dive any deeper in this regard to appreciate this coin, an 1831 second restrike proof 63 half-cent. This was lot 445 in the 1996 Bowers Eliasberg sale. Eliasberg acquired this coin as part of the Clapp collection that he paid $100,000 for through Stax in 1942. It appears that Jim McGuigan was the high bidder in 1996, paying $28,600 for this half-cent, once owned by Louis Eliasberg. When McGuigan's collection was sold last summer, this coin sold for $66,000. Bernard Edison, better known to the copper community by his real name, R. Tettenhorst, together with his cousin-in-law, Eric P. Newman, did for half-cent die varieties what Louis Eliasberg did for dates and mint marks. He collected all 99 varieties of U.S. half-cent struck for circulation, plus all of the proof-only half-cent die varieties. This collection came to be called the Missouri Cabinet. It is the only half-cent collection to have accomplished this. The Missouri cabinet was auctioned almost 10 years ago in January of 2014, and it remains the only PCGS registry set of half-cents that was 100% complete. I mentioned a moment ago the 1873 Carson City No Arrows dime that was the coin that Louis Eliasberg needed to complete his collection. This 1847 first restrike proof half-cent was to the Missouri cabinet what that 1873 dime was to Louis Eliasberg. It was the last coin Tet needed to complete the Missouri cabinet. In 1950, this proof 1847 first restrike half-cent that belonged to Charles Williams sold in that Kossoff mail bid for $95. Tettenhorst bought this coin at a Heritage Long Beach auction in September 2011. Including the buyer's premium, he paid $86,250. When the Missouri cabinet was sold in January 2014, the hammer price for this coin was only $70,000. Did Tet overpay in 2011? Not an easy question to answer. At most, only 3 specimens of this coin are known to exist. Only 2 if you believe, as Heritage does, that Walter Breen miscounted the census for this coin. Another example was unlikely to become available during Tet's lifetime. As he completed his half-cent die variety collection, I am quite certain that he was happy to pay whatever the law of supply and demand dictated the price for this variety was. Well, we could look at these amazing coins for days, but I think our point has been made. Before we were distracted by the images of some of the remarkable coins that these 2 collectors acquired, we were about to address the very different directions each collector took after 1950. Let's start with Louis Eliasberg. After completing his collection on November 7, 1950, one of the first things he did was to mount an exhibit in his hometown at the Baltimore National Bank, of which he was a founder and director. The 20-page brochure that he prepared in connection with the exhibit, seen here on the left, described the collection justifiably as, quote, the world's greatest collection of U.S. coins. But Eliasberg was somewhat understated in his own role. Nowhere in the brochure does he say that he's the owner of the collection, and indeed, the only reference in this regard is the last line of the foreword, which simply says, "This notable collection is exhibited through the courtesy of one of our depositors." Over the next 25 years, Eliasberg doubled down on his numismatic interest. Between 1950 and 1976, Eliasberg exhibited his collection in several other cities, including Dallas, New York, New Haven, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Both Life magazine and its competitor Look magazine ran multi-page spreads, including several photographs about the Eliasberg collection. In 1975, at the former home of the Garretts, Evergreen House in Eliasberg's native Baltimore, Maryland, Eliasberg gave a address about how he came to assemble his remarkable collection. To celebrate the nation's bicentennial in 1976, arrangements were made to display the Eliasberg collection at the United States Mint in Philadelphia. Elias Berg never saw that exhibit. On February 20th, 1976, 8 days after his 80th birthday, Louis Elias Berg died. He is buried at the Baltimore Hebrew Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland. Though David Bowers spent a week with him in the summer of 1975 evaluating and appraising the collection, Elias Berg never made arrangements for the disposal of his coins, leaving that task to his two sons. It would take 4 separate auctions spaced out over more than 20 years to fully disperse the Elias Berg collection. Earlier this month, many of Elias Berg's books and coin catalogs, together with the original inventories of the Clapp collection and the collection of Waldo Newcomer, were auctioned by Colby and Fanning. The Elias Berg collection is simply one that just keeps on giving. Now let's look at the very different path pursued by Charles Williams. After selling his entire collection to the Abe Kossoff Partnership in 1950, Williams appears to have lost all interest in collecting coins, even though he maintained his membership in the A&A. When he sold his coins, he was not yet 40 years old. For the next 45 years, Williams threw himself into a wide variety of non-numismatic activities. We mentioned earlier that he graduated from Georgetown University. Thereafter, he became very active in alumni affairs. He served as the president of the Georgetown Club of Cincinnati, and for a time served on the national governing body of the Alumni Association. In 1952, he was one of the first recipients of the John Carroll Award, given every year since to alumni to honor their achievements and record of service, exemplifying the ideals of the Georgetown founder, John Carroll. But most importantly, for 66 years, Charles Williams served the family insurance company, Western and Southern, as a salesman, as president, and then as a member of the board of directors for 40 years, 16 of which he served as chairman. He planned to retire from the board entirely following the company's board meeting on Tuesday, March 10th, 1998. But on Thursday, March 5th, 1998, Charles Williams died. He was 85 years old. He is buried at the Gate of Heaven Catholic Cemetery in Cincinnati, Ohio. In his obituary in the Cincinnati newspaper, his son is quoted saying, "At one time he had the finest coin and gun collections in the nation." While not as well remembered as Louis Elias Berg, at one time Charles Williams was a dedicated numismatist. His collection rivaled that of Elias Berg and far surpassed it in terms of early American copper die varieties. Although he left the world of coins behind in 1950, he nevertheless maintained his membership in the American Numismatic Association until he died. Late in his life, in 1983 and 1993, his name appeared in the Numismatist on the lists of 50 and 60-year members. However, when he died, no one seems to have told the American Numismatic Association. As you see, he died in 1998, but the numismatist doesn't recognize him in their list of recently deceased members until November of 2004. So nobody mentioned it to the A&A. And that is all I have. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them. Thank you for coming. If you want to learn more about these exceptional collectors, here is my source and photo credit page. And thank you again for coming. It's been a lot of fun. Anybody have any questions?
When did you start what has become this presentation?
I first learned about Charles Williams, it would have been in the spring, late spring, summer of 2020. I probably started this presentation in the early part of 2022 and gave it, as I said, in November of 2022 to the Newman Numismatic Portal Symposium. And it's been a lot of fun researching. And to follow up on our prior speaker, in addition to this being a golden age of variety collecting, it is a golden age of numismatic research. The Newman Numismatic Portal has just amazing resources available that you get just by clicking a button on your computer. Things that I remember listening to Eric Newman talk about his research activities where he would type out or have his secretary type out letters to the British Museum and ship them overseas and asking some questions, and then you have to wait for a month for the response to come back, and research was just a cumbersome thing. And now it is at the tip of your fingers. And so I did a lot of time, a lot of research just online, looking and reading. It's a golden age, and the writers we have today are amazing. Len Augsburger and Pete Smith and just amazing the number of people that are writing in all the amazing publications, Pennywise and C4 Newsletter and the Journal of Early American Numismatics. There's just a ton of resources available these days.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I think it's an amazing thing to show what this club can do. It's a happening event that had a coin that has led to this and that kind of sense. So it can happen. The research, the stuff's there, the pictures are there, in that coin. And it's you find a Charles Williams coin, it's unbelievably rare. People don't imagine it because the only way you know it's a Williams coin is if somebody carried the pedigree forward, and we know how that doesn't happen very often. So, I mean, there's literally not very many identified Williams coins there. So it's a
And thank you for pointing that out, because this is a coin that would likely have had its pedigree lost, because I was unaware of it until Bob pointed out to me that this was a Williams coin. And had I gone on to the great beyond, I guarantee you my kids would not have known that. That you were able to point that out and I was able to do this research is an amazing thing, and it's somewhat serendipitous, but it is because of the things like half-cent happening. Now, what the hell is a half-cent happening to the rest of the world? What are you talking about? What's a half-cent happening? But everybody here knows what we're talking about.
I didn't look at it and say that's a Williams coin. I looked at it because he's modest. His coin is very nice, and it actually won the half-cent happening that year. And I was surprised how many nice 1805 C2s there were on a rare variety. And I went and looked at catalogs to try to find where some of them came from, and I just happened to match the picture up. So once you match the picture up, then it just was tracing it back. So it just, so that little fact just led to now what we know about Charles Williams, that two serious half-cent collectors I talked to today had heard of him before that. So very
Great.
cool. So
Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts?
Not a question, but just a comment. But thank you for your presentation. I've been very inspired by that. I just checked my own collection, and I don't have any coins pedigreed to Williams, but you just now gave me the inspiration to find them. Thank you.
Well, good. I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.